All right, welcome back, everybody. We're so excited to share another episode of this podcast with you. In this particular episode, we are going to discuss very important gradebook considerations that make grading for learning possible. As I wrote about in the blog post, 3 ways to make the switch for grading for learning, you can take steps to ensure that a gradebook tool fairly accurately and authentically reports what students know and are able to do.
To help us explore this topic today, we have 2 outstanding practitioners and thought leaders joining us, David Woodward and Katie Budrow.
And it's my pleasure to introduce David Woodward. How are you doing today, David?
I'm good, thank you.
Great, thanks for being here. David is joining us today from Lafayette, Colorado, where he founded Forefront Education. It's an online platform designed to help teachers and leaders improve instruction and student learning with an effective resource to collect and analyze assessment results. He has over 25 years in education, spanning from classroom teacher to bilingual instructional coach and math specialist for Boulder Valley schools. When he's not brainstorming ways to ensure that Forefront becomes even better as a resource for educators, he can be found enjoying his other passion, playing music. So David, tell us a little bit about where you're joining us from today.
Well, I'm joining us from our house, and as is everyone during the pandemic, I think we're not very often in our offices, but yeah, we're outside of Boulder, Colorado. We're north of Denver and east of Boulder is where we are here in Lafayette.
Super. Tell us something we might want to know about either you or your family, maybe your community.
I come from a long tradition of educators. My mother was a teacher. My father was the president of the school board in Denver Public Schools. We talked about education a lot in my family growing up. My 3 of our 4 kids in our family, my siblings, ended up in education as well. My brother's teaching economics in Texas, and my sister teaches computer science up in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're just a passionate family about education. We really have always cared very much about public education in particular, but education in general.
I would love to be a fly on the wall for your family's get-together conversations.
Yeah,
That's quite a community. That's great.
Yeah.
What would be something you would share with our audience about your current education passions, projects, research, anything you're currently really digging into?
When I'm not working on Forefront full time, which is really what we're trying to do, is to create, this tool that's really going to support equitable practices in schools and really hopefully be something that can help people to move in the right direction in terms of education. I'm also working on creating a series of number sense screeners for K-5. These are a project that I've been working on for a number of years, but I'm right in the middle of some revisions of those screeners, and they'll be out by the end of this month. Cool. So watch for the spring number sense screeners will be published by the end of the month.
Very cool. Thank you.
And I get to welcome our guest, Katie Budrow, who is a middle school science teacher, a passionate advocate for standards-based grading and learning practices, and also, must be noted, a Green Bay Packers fan. Katie co-moderates a bi-monthly standards-based grading Twitter chat where educators from around the world come together to discuss ideas and practice around student-centered assessment and grading. She recently co-authored Moving Beyond Classroom Management, Leading a Culture of Learning with Garnet Hillman. I want to know more about that. Katie has also been featured in books by well-known grading experts, including our last guest, Ken O'Connor, as well as Tom Schimmer, Danny Hill, and Mandy Stalitz. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, how are you, Erin?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being here. Where are you joining us from today?
I am joining you from the blissfully warm Chicago suburbs. So it's in the high 60s today, which is kind of a miracle for March. So
that is very exciting.
Yes.
What's one thing we should know about you, your family, or your community?
So my husband and I, 11 months ago, had a beautiful baby boy right at the very start of the lockdown and pandemic. So he is officially a pandemic baby. He's met pretty much us, the doctor, and seen the mailman, and that's about it. But yeah, we've been enjoying, we've had a lot of time at home with him. We've been enjoying that. But yeah, it's definitely been a very interesting year.
My goodness. the stories you will have. And then as as things open up, that'll be a very interesting transition.
Totally different challenge.
Yes. Yep. What are your current education passions, projects, or research?
I just overall, I'm really passionate about a healthy classroom, right? We need a healthy classroom that's focused on learning. We need healthy assessment practices to not only determine if that learning has occurred, but support it as it goes forward. And we really, really need healthy classroom culture. We do a lot of really interesting things to students in schools. And the more we focus on the health of the overall system, the better the students will be.
Excellent. And I love that, keeping in mind the whole person, not just a part of a person. Is it healthy? I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to dive into some questions with our guests. Lindsay, what's our first question?
Thank you, Erin. So, David, I'll start out with you. You set out about designing an online platform that really radically differs from the typical online grading systems that too often, I would say, thwart standards-based assessment and reporting. What would you say were some of the key flaws in existing platforms? We don't need to name names, but key flaws in existing platforms that inspired you to develop an alternative option?
So I got to work with a lot of different kinds of electronic gradebooks during my career, ranging from spreadsheets that I built myself to CD-ROMs that I ordered in the mail back in the early 2000s. To when I was in Costa Rica teaching down there, they asked me to lead the implementation of a new grading book down there, and it was really cutting edge at the time. It was based on a local server, and yet at the same time, because it was built by programmers who were familiar with traditional grading practices that we know are flawed in that they're around this idea of completion and compliance more than anything else. Those grading systems tend to just kind of calcify the bad ideas of the past. That is, they average scores across the entire semester rather than thinking about what's the most recent evidence. They might have weighting practices that are in there so that we can weight our homework assignments at 20% and some quizzes at 30% and then our final at 50%. But really, it's still just an averaging around the entire thing. The other thing that really, I think, is a difficult problem actually within the switch from traditional grading and the traditional gradebooks and the digital gradebooks included in that is this reliance on points. That it's all about earning points, rather than proficiency, right? So that when we get to an assessment, and I'll go to math because that's my area of expertise, right? Where you'll see a teacher will give an assessment, and it might have a small section of fluency, where there'll be 10 addition problems or something like this, and the student has to answer all 10 of those. And then that's followed by a story problem, where the student answers one story problem. Well, the teachers will tend to give 10 points for the individual fluency task and 3 points, perhaps, for the story problem for getting the correct answer, for showing your work, and for drawing a picture, or whatever it may be. And so therefore, it adds this enormous weight to the fluency tasks, and then a smaller amount of weight to the story problem. So this reliance on points that we have is built into the very architecture of so many of the online and other electronic grade books that are out there, that people they cannot make the shift to thinking about what does it mean in terms of really progressing towards proficiency by discrete standards and performances.
I think that's some great points in there. And I really love the word you used, that it calcifies the kind of bad practices of the past, because it's so true, right? Like, we may have the right mindset, we may have the right idea, shift in practice what we're doing in the classroom, but then we enter things into these systems and it's basically just all been undone. And then again, as you said, it just calcifies that piece or cements it in the mind of the student or the parent or the person on the receiving end.
Absolutely.
That points system or the averages are what matters. So
right.
That's a great comparison.
Yeah.
Katie, tell us a little bit, how do you organize communication and reporting of grades in your role? And what are some key features that you might find most effective in online platforms, or maybe have there been some kind of workarounds that you have found effective?
Well, I've got a lot of different things. I've been really lucky to use a wide variety of different gradebooks. So there's lots you can do, whether you have a standards-based gradebook or kind of a more traditional gradebook setup. I think the two major things that I do that makes the most impact is I separate out behaviors from learning, right? Those two things get reported out separately. So your learning and the evidence that you're able to show of your learning is one category, and then your different behavioral skills. I like the term citizenship skills. I know some high schools use like college or career readiness skills. Like those are reported out separately. So that's kind of a really easy way, if you're just starting out and you have a traditional gradebook, is start to pull behaviors out and report them separately. You can do that as a category, or you could, do that in like a narrative type comment. It doesn't have to be crazy long, right? It could be a nice short little thing. The student works hard, but needs to improve their focus, just something really, really simple. But so that was kind of the major thing, is separating those two things out. But then I think after you've kind of got that down, the next easy workaround is to start putting things in the gradebook by standard as opposed to task, right? And you think of kind of the traditional gradebook that you see, the gradebook that I grew up, with my teachers writing in, there was a vocabulary quiz on Friday, or, there's a science lab on Thursday. And all of those little task-based items tell us what the student did, but it doesn't tell us what the student learned. So if you can start to pull those things and say, well, this vocabulary is for this, or the science lab was for that, now we're starting to get down to the meat of what that student is actually learning. And those kind of simple things are nice and just kind of easy to start with. So, but I don't know, I've done conversion scales, I've sent a separate gradebook home, I've done a spreadsheet gradebook, a paper, like, you name it, I've probably done it. But the two major things, right, come back to separating out behaviors from learning and start organizing things by standard or learning outcome as opposed to task. And you already are on a path to kind of more healthy assessment.
I think those are great points, and really in a sense they kind of mirror what David was saying, in that those are examples where if you practice them otherwise, you're miscommunicating to the students, right? If you're taking an assessment as David described, and there's multiple measures of student learning mixed into one average, or if, like you described, you're taking student learning and behavior and mixing them in, you're distorting that communication. So those separation factors and reporting that clearly, specifically upon the measures of learning, we begin to convey to the students that is what is important, right? So great examples. Thank you. David, did you have anything else you wanted to respond back to that, or are you good?
No, I think that piece that Katie talked about, really making sure that we're more specific in what we're measuring. I think it's interesting, your citizenship idea there. There's some who are saying, hey, listen, we should really only focus in on the performance relative to standards entirely. I think that makes sense, to make sure that we have that focus on standards in terms of what is the performance that's expected of the students. But also, I think when we think about report cards and grading as communication to the parents, we also and to the student, right? We also have to think about all the things that those people care about, right? And so I think it makes sense to say, hey, listen, your student is doing really well in math, but for goodness sakes, he's a disruption every day. We need to be clear about these things in our communication, and don't blend them in, with one another and just make it all mushy.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah. I've noticed that too, where if we just report on the academic learning, people can get the misconception that nothing else matters.
Right.
And it very much matters to be able to make well-rounded, healthy, happy, fully prepared humans. We're not talking about taking away, throwing out behavior skills, citizenship skills. We're talking about how to report them in ways that support growth in those areas, and be effectively communicated. So thank you for those examples.
Sorry, David, go ahead.
My next question has to do with, how can we support leaders, maybe principals, instructional coaches, district leaders in this journey. So Katie, I'm going to start with you. If you had a magic wand to help guide school leaders and how they communicate expectations to teachers around the use of Gradebook tool for learning, rather than for the tracking points and percent averages we've discussed, what details would you ensure were included in that information more support for school leaders.
Now, while I love the magic wand idea, I don't necessarily think that school leaders need one. I think the biggest thing you can do when you're looking at making a shift towards healthier practices is just really focus on why. Simon Sinek does a great job of starting with the why, and that is like the absolute key. That is the magic wand, if you will, to getting any teacher on board. If they don't understand why they should change their practices, you've already lost. And teachers are planners and analyzers and crafters of their art. And so when you come at them with something that might be new or different, sometimes you can get a significant amount of pushback, right? Because obviously if you're bringing something new to the table, perhaps that means they were doing something wrong. And so by starting with the why, it's not necessarily that we were doing things wrong before we were, but we don't have to say that, right? It's that we can do things better, right? We can show a more accurate picture of learning, and we can have students understand more about their progress and where they need to go. And so starting with the why is just absolutely essential when you get started. The other thing I think is important for school leaders to do is something that actually Amazon does as one of their leadership principles, and it's called disagree and commit. And notice the word in the middle is and. And Leanne Young does an excellent job of talking about this with school leadership, but you might not fully agree, teachers, with our healthy changes that are coming into place, but we need you to commit to doing them. And that's a huge thing for people to get over as well, right? A lot of times teachers are really good, right? I'll just close my door. I will do what I want. And you're still going to have people that are going to do that. But if you can get the bulk of your staff to, even if they disagree, commit to moving forward with, things like separating out behaviors, or instead of giving a 0, giving a 50%, just little minor changes and building off those, you kind of get this momentum going forward. But I think disagree and commit is something really powerful that we're not using as much as we should be.
Yeah, that's a good one. If I do wish I had a magic wand sometimes, but absolutely agree with everything that Katie just said, and this, like, starting with the why, the statement of purpose or something like this. But if I did have the magic wand right now today, I would ask every teacher to please stop putting zeros into their gradebook. I mean, that is just, it's mathematically, it doesn't make sense. Emotionally, it doesn't make sense. For the health of the child, it doesn't make sense. Everyone should stop putting zeros into their gradebook right now. And I mean, it's a personal thing for me. I as an educator and as a family of educators, we talk about education, my family, a whole lot. And I expressed to my children very clearly, my disgust in this idea of putting zeros in gradebooks. Perhaps it was my fault in some ways, but then at the same time, once those zeros did show up, it was immediate, that they understood the mathematics of it. And it was really hard to even care at that point in time. I even read something earlier this morning, honestly, and about a child who was like, the principal pulls him in and says, hey, look, you got so many zeros right now in your grade book that really you could get straight A's for the rest of the semester and you're not going to pass this course. And the kid said, well, then I think I'm just going to go pack up my locker. Those kinds of things are just damaging to children. And we need to stop using grades as punishment. It doesn't work. It never has, right? And we need to think about how do we support students in becoming, growing, learning, right? And helping them to grow. I think in terms of this idea of the tools and supporting leaders, it's a multifaceted thing. It has to be intellectual. It has to be also emotional. We have to tie in the emotions for teachers to understand why this is important. And then, part of, why I've created Forefront is because I really do believe that teachers need the tools. If you ask them to do something and you don't give them the tools to make that shift, it's impossible, right? We ask them to go build a building without any tools, they're not going to be able to do it. We need to make sure that we have the appropriate tools that match the paradigms that we're hoping that they're going to implement. And that's I think, absolutely quintessential.
I love that connection. And yeah, if we're going to ask what supports, what tools can we bring?
Yeah.
Katie, is there anything else you'd like to add?
just to build off David's idea that grades have been used kind of as punishment and motivators, right? Dan Pink does a wonderful job of talking about carrots and sticks, punishment and rewards, and Drive. As an educator or anyone who works in a school setting, if you have not read Drive, please pick it up today. It's an excellent book, and it really illustrates some of the damage we do with things like that. But grades as an incentive, it's only as an incentive for the kids that are getting the highest grades, right?
Right.
My dad was also an educator, and my parents used to pay me for good grades. They also offered to pay my brother, and my brother did not care, because he didn't get good grades, so he was never going to get any money. So, that kind of idea that a grade should be a reward or a punishment, it's not. All it is a picture of learning at a given moment in time. That's it. It's that simple, right? How much have they learned? How much evidence of that do we have at this particular moment in time? It's fluid, it changes, but yeah, we put a lot of pressure on grades. But yeah, if we could simply just eliminate that kind of reward punishment relationship with grades, we'd be off to a much better start.
Yep.
Thank you very much for those points. And it connects to what we talked about in some other episodes of exploring our working assumptions about what motivates and doesn't motivate students, and exploring what are healthy motivators, and including students in those conversations so that it's matching their interests, their motivations, and not just jumping to the assumption that grades are carrots and sticks and perpetuating that practice. Thank you. Over to you.
I do want to add it. Can I add in one more point on this thing, just because?
Of course.
Because it's another thing that really drives me nuts is, and I don't know how to get rid of it. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but this idea of giving weighted averages, giving the 5.2 to the students who are able to get into those courses. I really think it's a product of an inequitable system that was established in order to make sure that we limit access to certain aspects of higher education. The 5.2, I mean, it's almost code. I just signed up for high school classes for my students, sat there with him. I needed to explain him why that little W was next to some courses and not next to other courses. The W stands for weighting. I've actually heard someone said, no, it stands for white. It's really a problem. It's really a problem. And we need to address it because when we give those extra courses and it's code, for those of us who are in the inside who still understand these systems, it leaves others out, and it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, David, and I cannot wait for you guys to listen to one of our earlier episodes. We have a gentleman from our NWEA team who is a content designer focused on making sure our assessments are equitable, but he speaks about that exact piece of grades as a motivator for those who serve the system, whom the system serves.
Yep.
If you understand that grades will get you into good college and then ultimately potentially lead to your life success, that's because you were likely raised in a family or in a community that believes that that's the only key to success, and that that's what serves your future needs, right? But in other ways, it's not equitable. It excludes all of those things. You guys are hitting some amazing points. So thank you. Super thought-provoking. All right. So to add to that, this perfectly lines us up for the next question. So David, I'll start with you. We had an earlier episode with Matt Townsley discussing the value in shifting a culture away from a focus on earning to a focus on learning. What would you suggest are a few approachable steps that teachers could take when they think about organizing whether it's a grade book or their communication tool of choice?
Yeah.
If the existing constraints require entering points, what are some approachable steps that teachers could do to reorganize the system that they use to communicate with students and parents?
Well, I think there's actually one step that's very easy. Just don't put the points onto the paper, right? So if you need the points, and I've created a data system. I like having information available for collaboration. I need information available for communication amongst adults, right? However, when it comes to the student, just put feedback, targeted, helpful feedback onto the paper and leave the points off. Record the points in your grade book, whether it be a digital grade book or in your paper, wherever you keep your grades right? That's fine, because those are helpful for you to understand. They're helpful for you to target that instruction that needs to happen. They're helpful for you to collaborate and communicate. But at the same time, they're not necessary. And in fact, they can oftentimes damage for the students. And so when we're grading our papers, don't think about the grading. Think about the learning, focus on the feedback, provide the feedback to the students, but keep the grade off of it.
Super. Love to hear your perspective, Katie.
It's so funny that Matt Townsley just did a guest moderation for SBL Chat, and he asked this question, right? Yeah, you were there. And my response back to this question was just stop it with the points, right? It's really easy. David said, just give up the points. And it's easy for me to say, it was easy for me to do. It's not necessarily easy for everybody to do, but I think the point that we need to remember here is we train students into this focus on points, right? We train them to do this. If you go into a kindergarten classroom and you talk to them about what they're learning, they don't tell you how many points it's worth. They don't even know what a point is. They're just doing their thing, learning away, being natural in their, very kindergarten learning state. And as they get older and older, that training hones in. And if you are an isolated standalone teacher, it's really hard to kind of train them out of it. It's totally possible, but it's hard. But yeah, you have to prioritize feedback over points, right? Stop putting them on the page. Just like David said, start giving feedback. If you need them for yourselves, fine. It's a teacher tool. Go ahead and put them. But you probably don't need them anyway. You can figure out a different way to do it. Shortening the scale, right? Instead of having from 0 to 100%, right? Shorten that scale. I traditionally use a 3-leveled scale. My students don't like the lowest level. It's supposed to be 4, right? Like a 4, 3, 2, 1, but they don't like the 1 because nobody wants to be there. So normally we don't even refer to that. So it's really down to a 3. I know teachers that are gradeless that have gotten down to just a binary scale. Do they understand it? Do they not, right? Are they demonstrating the learning? Are they not demonstrating the learning? And I think with work, right, and going back to the points don't make the work meaningful. The grade doesn't make the work meaningful. What makes the work meaningful? It contributes to your learning. And the more you say this, you say it to parents, you say it to students, you say it to colleagues, the more you keep saying this, the more eventually it becomes real. A couple of years ago, I knew I was onto something with this because I had students trying to guess my password for my computer, and they kept going, it has to have learning in it. She has to have written learning in it, right? And I was like, okay, I'm clearly doing something right here. But the more you focus, and again, it's hard for teachers, right? If you grew up with points, you're going to want to give points, and it's easy, 9 out of 10, move on. But the more you kind of take that away, the better off for students.
I love it. David, an opportunity to respond if you like, or?
I think that Katie nailed it pretty well there. It's a culture that we've created of point getting, answer getting, point getting. I remember even, my older brother coaching me when I was a kid, look at the first thing you need to do is figure out the grading system of these teachers, because every teacher does it different, first of all, and you have to figure out what they like in order to get the points that you need, so that you're going to be able to get the grade that you want in the end. It wasn't about learning at all. It was all a game of points. And the whole culture when I was in high school, and I think very much still today, was a culture of point getting. And I think it's nice that you've put this and phrased it as a question of culture, because I think it really very much is a question of culture that we've got here. And we need to think about how we're going to change that if we're going to make progress.
Katie, you were there for the Twitter chat too. There's some great comments though that shared there that, we almost kind of undervalue students' level of intelligence on this too, right? When we assume that the only thing that they care about are points, we completely forget the fact that there's very likely they deeply care about their own learning.
Well, and we've made it important, right? We've made the game of school important for them. Yeah. So how else are they going to respond? Of course, they're going to respond as if those things are important, until you get those few that just don't care. And they are going to respond, as if it's not important, because it really isn't. So.
Super.
Yeah.
And thinking about that culture, and Katie, we talked a little bit earlier before this episode started about how we have these conversations, or how we partner with parents, families, to make these shifts. What would you offer as ideas for strategies for teachers or leaders to consider, and how to partner with parents and families to make these shifts?
I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that this is really hard for people, right? It is hard for teachers to transition. It can be very hard for students to transition. I've had many students that have been very resistant. I had one student several years ago that would write on corners of my board, just grade using percentages, like just all over, and the entire year, just grade using percentages. And I knew it was him. He thought I didn't know, but I knew. But for parents, this is exceptionally hard. One, they are not normally education professionals, right? They are not trained in this. However, they did go to school, so they know a lot about the experience of going to school. Right. And when we start changing our grading language, we're asking them to speak and be fluent in something completely new to them, right? They know what an A means. An A means their kid is doing really, really well and is going someplace, right? Especially if they can compare their kid to the other peers, right? My kid is getting A in this class. They're the best, right? They are the best. They're doing great. They know what a B means. My kid's fine. They're okay. I don't need to worry. Maybe I monitor a little bit, They know what a D means. Oh, we're in trouble. Right? So we're asking them to speak an entirely new language. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of communication about not only why, but how this is better. You're doing it right if the grading system you get around to is more accurate, is more meaningful, and is easier for parents, teachers, and administrators to understand, and students, right? It has to be more accurate. It has to be more meaningful. But the easy part, I think sometimes we get hung up on, and it needs to be easier for parents to understand. I've seen grade books for standards-based grading that are 30 pages long. What parents want to sift through 30 pages of anything about their child? Like, just when, of course, they're going to push back and be like, I just want to know, did my kid get an A? Like, that's all I want to know. So we can't fault them, but we really need to push them forward. And easy ways to start, right? It's just talking about what grades mean. Grade doesn't mean a good grade doesn't mean your child tried really hard, right? I get that a lot. My student tried so hard on this project. Yes, but their cell model, every single part of it was wrong, It's not a measure of how pretty or neat or glittery or postery it was, right? It definitely isn't their behavior, but they worked so hard, right? And they're so polite about asking questions. And it definitely shouldn't be a comparison, rank, or sorting, right? We don't care who made the best cell model in my classroom. We care that we made cell models. But I think, again, this takes a long time for parents to really start to embrace this. What's really interesting, though, is, again, you look at early elementary and they're okay with it. It's when the pressure starts, right, around middle school to high school, that's when they really have a hard time. They want to see those grades because in their mind, like David said, right, this is what's going to carry them forward to college. And that's really only the ones that know how to play the game too. So shifting it back and communicating with parents about, nope, this new language is better, and here's why, is a great place to start.
I love that. And I'm connecting to the points about show how it can make our conversations, our partnership easier. That's something I noticed where I was getting traction with the parents and families I was working with. We can get really targeted and precisely the thing to work on rather than a big long list of unfinished tasks. It's no, we're trying to grow learning here, and here's the next steps that will work for this student. So I love that reminder. How can we make this easier for learning? David, what do you want to say?
Yeah, no, I think Katie hit on a really, really important thing there, that if we're not improving our communication, then really we're not doing better, right? I mean, if it's not easier for the parents to understand what's going on, then what have we done, and this is a huge shift. And Katie started a long time ago also about talking about the why and starting with the why. Parents need to be brought into that conversation. It's not just about the teachers at the school, but the parents need to be brought in. And I'm just going to make a little confession. When standards-based grading came out, and I was working as a fifth grade teacher at the time, when they started talking about it in my district, I went to the principal. I said, listen, I'm going to fight this tooth and nail. I really am not. I'm not fond of this idea. I didn't feel like it matched the way that I thought about student progress. I thought I was really top notch. I thought I had the whole thing. I was building my own fancy spreadsheets. I mean, it's hard for us to think about how much this involves in terms of both teacher practice and the parent side of thing. And here's another quick experience. I'm all too familiar with the dentist chair, and my dentist, he was placing on this crown recently, and he's like, just one more little bit, and we got a solid A+ here, right? And I thought, wow, how? I mean, I knew what that meant. It was of course comforting to know that I was going to get this new crown in my mouth, but it's just grades, and that idea of an A+ is just absolutely ingrained in our culture. And we have to, if we're going to make a shift like this, we have to communicate the whys so clearly to the parents. Katie said one other thing I just really want to bring back just quickly, though, is this idea of accuracy. I'm passionate about this idea. As I'm fearful, and having watched this as an instructional coach and in my profession over years, that as we attempted to become more precise in our grading, we lost accuracy in some ways because and partially this is because we didn't provide the tools to the teachers, right? We suddenly asked them to give 5 grades for social studies, 4 or 6 grades for reading, 2 grades for writing, or 3, maybe 5 grades for writing on top of 4, 7 grades for math, and who knows how many for PE. And the idea that we're able to manage all that information for 26, 28, as a middle school teacher, you have hundreds of students at high school as well, oftentimes. And the idea that I'm going to be able to manage the information and the evidence of learning for all of these students is really a challenge that we need to face. And if we're going to be able to make the shift and convince parents that the evidence that we're working off of and the communication that we're providing is not only more precise and understandable, but also accurate, that's a real challenge that we have to meet as educators, I think.
I like that explanation. Finding that intersection, that sweet spot. I think it's very important. You can swing one way, another way. We got to find the middle way.
Right.
Katie,
something manageable and meaningful. Manageable and meaningful. It always has to be that.
I like that. Excellent. Katie, anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add. Well said, David.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Lindsay.
those have been some fantastic discussions. I want to give you both the opportunity to share if there's anything that you feel that we didn't ask today that you were hoping we would have. And I'll just say, David, we'll give you the opportunity first if there's something you would like us to have asked, or pass it on to Katie if she would like to share.
I'm not quite sure. In terms of this conversation is one that's going to go on for a long time, and has been going on for a long time. As I was preparing for this conversation today, I went back to books, that were 25, 30 years old, to think about how do we improve grading. Gusky was doing kind of a summary of things that we've been talking about grading for well over 100 years. And this is a long history of things. And it's really only recently, from the 50s and 60s on forward, where we really came to this idea of the percentage-based grading, and that this is the way that it is. And now we're, coming back to the idea that really, things could be different and things could be much better. But I think that we have to get there. One thing that I didn't hear us say today at all that I think is really, really important, and that we, needs to be said, is that we need to, as we're building healthy students, as Katie said, this idea that we are all growing as learners, and this idea of growth mindsets is really fixed and tied closely to the idea of grading. We really are, our traditional grading methods here in the United States really make it hard for students to think of themselves through a growth mindset lens. And that's something that we really need to understand, that we have to promote this idea that we are all learners, we're constantly learning, and that we recognize the learning and we honor it and we report relative to learning.
Fantastic. I love it. Katie, I'll give you an opportunity. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It could also be a comment of something that just kind of a last word, if you will.
Well, one of the things that we didn't talk about was kind of how the gradebook itself, the idea of like giving grades, actually impacts our entire existence in school, right? And not just behaviors in classrooms, not just like things, how students progress on, but thinking even about like timing, right? The gradebook actually determines the time frames of school. And I've seen districts do this really, really well, where they've actually just given up on dividing years into, sections, right? They instead have like a continuous gradebook that follows the student up throughout their career. And I think that as we look forward, I know we have a lot of work to do, but as we start to look forward as to what we could do, gradebooks even determine whether a student progresses to the next grade or not, right? Traditionally, you could be held back if you didn't get the right grades to move you on up. Now that's kind of an antiquated practice now, but just the idea that the gradebook is controlling so much, and systemically, what can we start to break down? Because it shouldn't have control over, all of these things. What should be driving all of these things is what school should be all about, and that is learning, right? And that is not just learning math, that is not just learning language arts, but that's learning how to be a decent human being as well. And so just the idea that we need to really start to break down this idea of the gradebook driving everything, and instead put the focus squarely back on learning is just kind of the direction we need to go.
Okay.
Well said.
Yeah.
David, you have something to add there?
No, I'm just happy to hear it. That's good.
No, and I would agree completely too. And thank you both so much. There's been so many rich insights here. It's really actually disappointing to say that our time is coming to an end together, but I want to thank you both tremendously. I think this is going to be really meaningful information for our viewers and listeners. I do also want to just give Aaron the opportunity to share out, a farewell and a thank you, if you will.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I know there's lots going on in everyone's lives as we navigate post-2020. So thank you for being here with us and sharing your experience and thoughts.
And most certainly check out some of the resources that were mentioned here today, some of which are coming directly from David and Katie's own work. Books, forefront, if you will. We've mentioned several times today the SBL Twitter chat. And if it's just an informal way to get involved in a discussion with other professionals out there that are learning the process and having progress themselves, and just considering the continued learning opportunities there for anyone interested. If you're beginning this journey, if you're in the journey somewhere and need to continue to learn, those are some great opportunities. And I hope you'll all be sure to join us for our next and sadly our last episode, round tips for getting started with all the things that we have shared in this series on grading for learning. We presented a lot of interesting ideas out there, and we look forward to hearing finally from Dr. Roberto Derisanz, the head of school at Millennium School in San Francisco, and Dr. Heather McClure. She's a researcher and professor at the University of Oregon, here to share with us some practical tips for those out there ready to get started or ready to continue their own journey in grading for learning. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
David and Katie.
Thank you.